Sounds good.
Very
So
good.
get to welcome our own John Anderson to the presentation today.
Thank you for having me. And please know that this afternoon session will inform and be noted on our data quality checklist. So it's not only a wonderful opportunity to overview the national reporting system and discuss how adult education affect programming and instruction, but also keep South Dakota's WIOA Title II compliant and at the exemplary level of data quality, which is really all of your local efforts to collect, enter, and analyze data under the national reporting system. So with that, this slide deck follows rather the same model of the previous iteration of this session, which was back in January 23. And really the data's capacity to affect and inform have not changed. And perhaps you have another bulleted point to include with the impact of data, right? Policy, how you're delivering classes or content in the classroom, funding, technical assistance across a whole range of topical areas, local capacity and effectiveness. So many of these hyperlinked resources we're going to reference. And in doing so, I'm trying to, for some who are newer, build your familiarity with various aspects that inform the data collection, entry, reporting, and analyses, um, and hopefully spur your curiosity or help you better see where your local interactions inform the state and national picture of adult education data under WIOA Title II. Just recent, any comments or questions before I commence? And again, I'm glad you could all join me on such a beautiful afternoon. So really the focus here is on last year's program 23-24 data, right? It's the most recent year for which we have a full year's data and federal approval. And in fact, some of you may know that just yesterday, OCTE, the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, right, our federal aegis, published PY 23-24's data, right? Because they have to review each state and outlying territories, 57 separate submissions across like 17 data tables, et cetera. And we got our data within the national rankings. But all of this really starts with the assessment policy. And in the event that the Office of Career Technical Adult Education, the division within that, DAEL, right? The Division of Adult Education and Literacy, if they were to monitor, I think one of the very first questions they would ask you on their local visit would be, where is your assessment policy? And can you show it to me? And so that really needs to ground our day-to-day operation. And of course, we can make changes, and we have just recently. If you'll take a look here, this is of course in SharePoint, but this was revised just in January because we needed to include the new assessments for right, Best Plus 3.0, Best Literacy 2.0, TABE 13-14. And when this was initially published or submitted for review and approval, it would have been, because we have to submit them like a year and a half in advance, right? So that was submitted in October of 23. And so a lot changed between the submission of October 23 and January 25. So again, we can always make updates and hone that and then resubmit it for approval. And of course, within our assessment policy, we have our annual performance targets. Of course, we're looking at this year's assessment policy. The scope of today's discussion really centers on last year's data. So with that, here's the U.S. Department of Education site, and this is the accountability reporting branch. And these are the data sets that I was mentioning. And they have, of course, the national data here, right? SPR, statewide performance reports. Statewide performance reports are essentially, the joint PEARL outcomes. If you ever hear our Title I partners talk about the PEARL, the participant individual record layout, and it really gets into the very specifics of all that you collect on that student intake form: age, gender, race, ethnicity, status, barriers to employment, all of that are coded on the back end. And we've got data going back, right, of 5 years here. And so these most recent data here are the common elements, these joint PEARL items that our colleagues are reporting on as well. And you can see here, right, there's a tick box in Title II because this is our respective submission, but Title III, Wagner-Pfizer, job service, voc rehab, youth, adult, and dislocated worker on the Title I side all submit almost exactly the same report. Well, it is the same report. We don't always have entries in every one of these fields. You'll see here percent admin, training, not filled. I would draw your attention to a few things. Of course, you can look at the money expended for career services per participant versus training services at $275, and our co-enrollment figure for 23-24 of 13%. And then, we're not going to go through all of these fields because there are quite a few. But of course, the columns, we've got employment rate Q2, Q4, median earnings, the credential rate, and measurable skill gains. So I draw your eye to that 37.8. That was the state's overall measurable skill gain for last program year. And they break down all of these data across age, sex, age, ethnicity, and race. And then they further disaggregate these figures or these outcome measures, right? These on the top column are the follow-up outcome measures. And without you collecting those Social Security numbers, I can't glean, I can't data match these first 3 columns, right? So that work you do is incredibly important. When I last looked, South Dakota had something near 83% of our current students have a Social Security number. And some of those will go on to get their Social Security number, at least historically. That number gets more robust. Because I got to remind you, these figures are very delayed. I mean, some of these are a year and a half old in terms of employment outcomes because of the staggered collection and reporting periods. And then here on the left-hand side, across the rows, you'll see all these barriers to employment. And for us, even though our students might not identify or self-report or self-attest that they've got a cultural barrier, a low level of literacy, we on the back end mark that within our MIR management information system, right? So that all of our students have that. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't be eligible for our services. So our number 1833 reconciles with the total statewide. So that's the overview of that template. And then we can look and compare our colleagues. So now I'm over on the U.S. Department of Labor website and looking at the same reports for our one-stop partners. Wagner Pizer being Title III, right? The job service, connecting employers with job seekers, right? Dislocated worker, adult, and youth. And so I've got a slide here. I think it's opportune. Title I, adult, youth, and dislocated worker versus Title II participants for this last program year, right? You can see Title I adult right around that 1,300 mark. Title Youth, 550 some. Title I dislocated worker. And of course, the dislocated worker program, I don't believe most Title II programs deal with dislocated workers often. I'm sure it happens on a rare occasion, but dislocated workers tend to be those individuals who lose their job due to a large closure. And sometimes those dislocated workers can be classified as a TAA, Trade Adjustment Act, where they get, when that job moved overseas, there are special funds that give those workers what's called the kind of the golden ticket. They get access to all sorts of funding, master's degree, travel across country. I mean, it's a really robust program to help support those workers heretofore. And then, of course, Title II, over 1,800. I think it's 1,883. So as we stand amongst our, Title I partners, you can see that our trend was strong last year, and it's only increased this year. Comments, questions, thoughts?
John, not related to
Yes.
this slide, but a question that popped up for me was regarding in that state assessment policy, you showed us a little view into it with the statewide goal for MSGs. It used to be in our policy, it seemed that we broke that up into the
Yeah.
different.
Oh, I'm so glad you noted that. That's a perfect setup, Laura. And I expressed in formal writing and verbally on Shop Talk how much I really appreciated that, because Octay used to give us a workbook that was very, I mean, to me, it was a pretty sophisticated historical longitudinal workbook of our past performance and anticipated algorithms. And between the 23-24 program year and this year, they stopped doing that. And so that's why you see here, these are all broken out by EFLs, Laura, where the most recent assessment policy is not. I'm not sure where that file went, but yeah, it's all consolidated. And ultimately, even this one, Laura, even though we broke them out by EFL, it didn't, to the feds, it didn't matter. They were looking at the aggregate figure anyway. It was more of a local or statewide courtesy that they did that, and now they've gone away from it. And I don't know if part of it, we used to negotiate performance on paper and send a Excel file back and forth. We'd complete that workbook, and now they've digitalized it and put it onto the NRS website. So I don't know if that was a technical simplification, but we don't do that anymore, and I kind of miss it. And while we're here, let's look at these EFLs, right? So we can think of these first six, of course, ABEs, level 1 through 6, and then beginning literacy through advanced ESL would be 7 through 12, or as maybe you ESL folks know them, ESL levels 1 through 6. Green indicating we met or exceeded, of course, and pink being we failed to meet that target. Make sure you can see the entirety of that slide. And so thoughts, concerns, context here? I mean, to me, when I look at this, gosh, high adult secondary ed, right? Those are the students who are coming in on that TABE, probably a level A, right? At the highest level. And we estimated 60%. We estimated 79%, and we fell far short of that.
But
But I
then
think you know why. Tell me.
what's the quantitative number
Exactly.
that you
It's
start
such a
playing?
small number. We'll
Yeah.
look at it. It's such a small number. So that takes you to perfect setup. No, not that one. Let's go here. This is the NRS, right? As we talk about it. This is the portal where we submit our annual data, right? Our colleagues submit quarterly data on the Title I side, and they submit individual records, participant records. We don't. We submit aggregate records once a year, at least to this point. Heretofore we have. So here's where we go, click South Dakota. This is public. I'm not signed in. If I sign in, I'll get access to a lot more reports because I've got those admin privileges. But here are these data that are accessible to you. And when we look at table 4 from last year, and I trust you can still see my table. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Here are the 1,801 unique individuals. The number is 1833 on that statewide performance report, if you remember. Let me take you back there. Can I take you back there without paying? Yeah, 1833. See that there? Okay, so that's that number. And of course, that's periods of participation. We had an extra 32 periods of participation with that 37.8. But look at here. When you look at this ABE total, right? 46.36 was the measurable skill gain for all of those ABE levels. And someone can just tell me why ABE did so well this last year. That was resultant of what?
Because we could count those subtests as measurable skill gains.
And if you look at the ESL total, it was not quite 24% versus over 46%, over, twice the performance with ABE this past year. So
Because it takes 2 years to get a gain out of the lower levels, and we've proven that over and over and over again.
and the feds at one point said, oh, it doesn't. Based on their studies, it's the same. I think the psychometricians and statisticians, I think really should have a field day that, and as we watch federally and funding for educational research and sciences and so forth. But think about, we're in the Department of Labor. We're not in a community college. We're not in a post-secondary university system. And think about the demographics we serve. Those here with work, secondary migrants, former refugees, resettled, and their educational backgrounds, etc. That's where I'm thinking of, like, an NRS table 6 on that sort of topic, right? Where we can see what were the backgrounds and educations for our non-US school-based, right? 33 of our participants had no schooling prior. And when you look at this, it's like hundreds of our students, had no secondary school diploma, etc. And then on the flip side, we have nearly 250 of our non-US based students with post-secondary professional. So, we can go down so many different data explorations, but
John, one of the ones that occurs to me is South Dakota consistently does well in those follow-up indicators, in the table 5 indicators, where we've got a good employment rate and good median earnings. And I wonder if anyone's ever looked at the correlation between that level of people who are working, especially working full-time. And I know we don't track full-time versus part-time anymore. It's one of the things that I kind of regret, because we always had a lot of full-time employees in our numbers as well. But that one of the things I marvel at is how our students can come and learn at the end of a very long, very strenuous workday. And the fact that the majority of our students are coming to us employed, and those who come to us unemployed are getting employed very quickly. I wonder if how much that plays in as well, that they just don't have the cognitive bandwidth at the end of a long day to put in any extra beyond the classes they come to.
Becky, I think that's such an important contextual item too. And how much of that gets into the statistical adjustment model is based on some of those factors that, right?
Yeah.
And given South Dakota continually, right? Sioux Falls and Rapid City have the lowest unemployment rates in the nation currently and, recently. But to that point, right? So these are quartile rankings, right? Fourth quartile being the best, the highest, right? And in descending order with the median. And so if you look here, let's look, we were talking about ESL MSG versus our ABE MSG. So let's just look South Dakota, North Dakota, South Dakota. Okay, that 46.3% placed us 43rd in the nation, right? At the second quartile. With the median being 52%. If we consider the second column in the ESL standings, we were 52nd out of 57, right? Because we include the 7 outlying territories. Okay. Still, when we combine those two, where does that put us? South Dakota. It moves us up slightly to 47th overall in the nation. That doesn't give us bragging rights, but when we get to right here, second quarter employment, South Dakota, 9th in the nation, to your point. Fourth quarter employment, 10th in the nation, 4th quartile, right? Median earnings, 4th quartile, 7,400. And even our credential rate, 52%, just at the very top of the 3rd quartile. So you are effective, and I think the partnership really too, effective at helping people get jobs, keep jobs, advance in their work, and make some relatively or comparatively decent earnings. Other comments or questions?
John, is there,
Yes.
given the number of students we serve, are we comparable in the amount of funding that programs have in South Dakota compared with our national counterparts?
Good question. So here, and as you know, government transparency, isn't it terrific? So I just typed, I have it filed, but I thought, maybe I can just search it. And so I, Googled Octay estimated award totals, and it came up, or it generated the first hit. And so these are the 23-24 funding levels of all those 57 states and territories. And they're in, I've actually cut and pasted this so I can sort it by funding versus alphabetically. But, we are considered minimally funded at 1.454 million. And so, you can look locally, but that only tells part of the picture, right? Minnesota has a grant award of 7.3 million, but their state, I don't know, 45 million or better. I don't know. I'm kind of pulling that from my hat, but I know it's significant, right? Whereas my colleague in Montana, is it? They have the absolute minimum support, and they actually have to require local providers to submit match. They don't have really any state general funds of which to speak. So here's as I was preparing for this session, I'll jump ahead here again. I thought this was interesting. So of our award total, that constitutes, and you math folks can tell me if my place value is wrong here, 203 thousandths of 1%, right, as our funding, where our participants last year, 23-24, constituted 142 thousandths of 1%. So we're not, I guess I would like to quote unquote give or participate as much as we get, proportionate to the federal funding. But I'm excited to see what 24, 25 data and balance look like. So I don't know if Laura, if that provides any context to your inquiry. And as I was thinking of that, you know, there are all sorts of, you know, how can you use these data? And I don't know what your shareholder meetings are like, but I got to thinking, well, when I think about that, boy, we're just such a small representation of the national picture. But then I just happen to, like, you know, I've been looking at our adult Indian and Alaska Native row in this, right? 41%. We haven't had 41% measurable skill gain on this demographic. Oh, I'd have to go back. So it's really exciting. But then as I think, okay, we had, when you're thinking race and ethnicity, table what? 3, 2, table 2. And when, yeah, 352 into the overall, there are 10,000 Native Americans being served nationwide. I must have closed it. But mathematically, South Dakota serves 3.3% of all the American Indian Native Americans in Title II participantship last year. And so that seems like an interesting juxtaposition to me, right? Overall, we're 0.2%, but we serve 3.3% of the Native Americans nationwide. So it's those sorts of contexts that I think might prove meaningful for you.
Well, the Native American is going to be a low number because you don't have federal funding on the reservations where the greatest concentrations are.
And, you know, again, some of these data sets are so very small, but some of these are, you know, quite meaningful. And, you know, if you're interested in doing some of those data extrapolations, the NRS, even under the public reports here, and a whole host of demographics. You can take a look at corrections. Oh, yep. I'm sorry, I didn't give that long enough. You can break that down into states and disaggregate it, right? Wow, look at that correctional trend. And of course, when I change the scope of the years, you know, we can see that trend in greater context, right? And obviously in 2020, we all know what happened, but I mean, visualizing that for me really helps contextualize this trend in recent years. So those are great resources for your use. I come back here and just note, right, we did not meet that 41% MSG target. However, Title II, because of a dearth or a lack of data, right? Because we only submit once. Our partners submit quarterly and individual records. So we don't have the robust data sets to make our data yet apparently statistically viable. So this had no apparent effect. It didn't, we're not on a corrective action plan or any sort of punitive reaction. I don't know what the future will bring, at what point we will get to that data solvency point, but and again here, these numbers or raw score next to the percentage, those are based on historical participant data. So previously, when Octave did give us that worksheet, they anticipated we'd have about 578. And really, we fell short of that by about 81. But that doesn't matter. We don't negotiate on raw numbers. We negotiate on percentages only. So, okay. Now, we can look at our colleagues in partner programs. Data-wise, the Federal Register really houses our updates regarding NRS approved assessments. So that's another facet of the data. We don't choose, the approved assessments go through a highly routinized protocol with the psychometricians. I think American Institutes for Research has historically had that contract to assist Octave with these studies. And I can just say as an aside, they've brought these test publishers to DC for conversations where they're exploring even further disaggregated. Oh, what about scale score within measurable skill gains? I mean, I'm worried they're going to further dilute and complicate. So I shared my perspective from a small state single workforce area board. But ultimately, these Federal Register reports dictate or publish which assessments are approved through which dates, and then the sunset periods. And you're all likely aware of our sunsets as we transition to 3 new assessments: TABE 1314, Best Plus 3.0, and Best Literacy 2.0. So there is a process. It's not at the state level where I'm negotiating these directly with test publishers. We've talked about the public portal. For those interested in really delving the statistical adjustment model, there are resources here on the National Reporting Systems website, including a statistical modeling tool. Don't really want to spend a lot of time with this, but you're welcome to delve this. They've got all of their methodology and median earnings models, credential attainment models listed, and then a breakdown of various states. So that's a resource to those interested. Again, talking at the federal level, some of you may have seen before the new year, WIO was getting a little attention nationally and in the news. Verify that I'm a human. There were talks that WIO would get reauthorized, and then things changed pretty quickly. But here is really where the sausage is made, right? There have been recent amendments. Here's a House resolution as recently as February from Democratic representative out of Georgia. Here's an amendment from a Republican out of Georgia, and a whole sorts of sundry amendments, both on the House side and the Senate here. Here's the Senator Jack Reed, right? Democratic senator from Rhode Island. And so this is where we see any potential changes, reinterpretations, reprioritizations that would happen often as House bills are put forward, Senate bills are put forward, and then sort of that intermediary process where they come to some sort of resolution or consensus between the two bills, oftentimes. We can see that here in this slide, right? This is PY 23-24 funding across a whole list, and adult ed is what, 4 from this total employment and training line, right? Adult education state grants. And these would be in millions, right? So in fiscal year 22, which for us, we think of that as program year 22-23, it was 690 million. For 23-24, Biden administration requested 700,000, or I'm sorry, 700 million. The House suggested 714 million. The Senate, you can see 7.25 million. And ultimately in the omnibus funding, they settled between the 714, 725 at 715, 7.15 million, which was a 3.6% increase over our previous funding. Let me. APLA, we owe a Title II, on the House side falls under the education workforce. And then there's also an appropriations committee. And within that appropriations committee, this is the most recent report. I did a quick term search here, and this is the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Ed's overall budget, right? Not strictly adult ed. And here you can see, because Octane encompasses, right, career and technical ed as well. Here's that $715.445 million that's awarded. So it's a whole process. And of course, we can't lobby under the Hatch Act. And so we have partners who, of course, we're able to educate, and like the COABE initiative, Educate and Elevate, we're able to make stakeholders and the public aware. We can't directly lobby for funding. And I guess in my narrow purview, there are 3 primary, South Dakota Association for Lifelong Learning as our statewide association. There's the Coalition on Adult Basic Education at the national level. And then as a state director of adult ed, the Department of Labor and Regulations membership to NASDA, which does employ Capitol Hill partners for some work on Capitol Hill.
So John,
Yeah,
and
please.
the rest of you, a couple things. Don't know if you're aware of this, but COABE rebranded again.
Oh.
And they're no longer the coalition. They're just COABE, the Voice of Adult Education. It doesn't
Oh,
stand for anything anymore. So we no longer have to remember what it stands for now.
oh, I did not know that. Thank you.
And then another thing I was looking at, and it would be, I guess I'd like the opinion of the group here. So I did a few quick figures of total population versus population of 18-year-olds versus our adult education to come up with the percentage served of the state 18 years in age and older who are served in adult education. So I did South Dakota to Minnesota, and it was pretty atrocious. So it's like less than 3%, 0.3% of the population, where it's 0.8% of Minnesota. So then I thought, well, what's North Dakota look like? North Dakota even beats us. Why are we not serving as many people as we should be? Or are people just better educated?
And are you looking at like American Community Survey data from US Census?
I pulled the query from total population served, and then I asked, of the total population, how many of those are 18 years of age or older? And so I use that as my denominator. And then the numerator, I used the nrs.ed.gov number from 23-24 to get the
Well, and
number.
especially at those age ranges, when I've looked at American Community Survey data And how many South Dakotans don't have a high school diploma or its secondary equivalent? You know, well, it's like 55,000 approximately. But of those 55,000, a significant portion are over 55.
That would be the same in Minnesota and North Dakota. I bet.
You know, and I mean, how many factors, right? I know in my short tenure here with the Department of Labor, 15 years, when I started, we had 12 adult ed partners. We're down to 6 subrecipient partners. You know,
Well, yeah, and obviously I put in there, Minnesota has $50 million in state adult ed funding, so that should make it, that better make a difference. I didn't check North Dakota's.
you know, and we underreport. We're not required actually to report our full funding, but there again, too, that's a resource you have. And if you ever have those questions, I'm happy to, not that I have all the answers, but I'm happy to help you take a look, you know, at our fiscal reports. This is all in the public domain, and
It would be interesting to know if there's a magic tipping point where this much more money could almost double the number of people we're serving, you know, and what that, I don't think it's 100%. So it'd
if
be
you
interesting to see.
if you look, so you can look at every state and see what they have for this row I under recipient share, maintenance of effort. We have 485,000, but actually in state general funds, we get close to over 1.1 million, but we don't report that because then it locks in that level of maintenance of effort. And if we were to lose funding, then we still are required to meet that. So we'd have to lean on you local providers to find all that excess. And anyway, so it's an interesting idea. I only share that because you might not get the full picture or scope of state funding just because
Well,
of
and
that quirk.
the state funding, I did a general Google search to
Okay,
come up with that.
good.
I didn't get it out of there. And I didn't factor in,
Well,
you know,
and
I didn't factor in the CPP of all that. It's just an interesting thought
it
process.
is, and you, in looking at data just in the past 4 or 5 years in South Dakota, the number of alternative instruction, i.e. homeschool students, has increased over 400%, right? And with the new changes to alternative instruction, et cetera, does that have an effect? Does having one of the lowest employment rates in the state or in the nation, where young adults can go make 20 bucks an hour without a high school diploma, bear into that? These are good questions too, as you consider your local data in those contexts. Let's say 345. I'd also like to share this as a resource, right? The PIAC skills map. Do I have it up? Do I have it here? Oh, well, and NASDAQ too, while I'm here, I had mentioned, and this is a resource I know they're trying to really promulgate or reinforce. They don't have the 23-24 fact sheets up yet because these data just became available, but they will run these, and they provide sort of a, I don't know if you'd call it an infographic really, no, but some common metrics where you can use this drop-down menu here if you want to compare other states. I'll go ahead and generate South Dakota's here, right? Where it's pulling a lot of these data from, and they've got the citations, American Community Survey, 5-year PUMS data, our funding, our performance. This is kind of nice to see, right? The significance of programming by ESL, ABE, and ASC. So that's a resource for you. And it may be in your local conversations when you're meeting with shareholders or when you're serving multiple counties, right? And you have these huge geographical service areas. You can look at the nation here at figures. This is the international survey, right? PIAC of adult literacy and numeracy. And so we can disaggregate, get down to South Dakota here. You can get down to even your counties in South Dakota. Where's Beetle County? There's Beetle County, and do these analyses based on the level of proficiency. And I'll give that a moment to load. And of course, you hover over any of these hot points and it'll give you more context. But break down literacy and numeracy, how you compare against the nation, the state. Well, it's really taking a long time to load. Okay, so in Huron, or I'm sorry, in Beetle County, including Hitchcock, my hometown, literacy and numeracy are below the state average. And they've got a little some context here, right? And you can delve, well, what does level 1 really mean? Or level 2, level 3, etc. And you can, with a click of the indicator here, switch to numeracy and look at, right, in Lincoln County, the rates are statistically higher. So this might be a useful data tool for you as well. It's certainly a lot more accessible sometimes than using American Community Survey data. You know, it just quickly. So we've got how many different levels? We've got our assessment policy, which is really informed by the technical assistance guide, right? You should all know the technical, those who are involved with data entry and analysis should be familiar with the NRS technical assistance guide. These do get updated recently, and this was updated recently. And of course, I have the November 24 in our SharePoint, but they're available publicly on the websites. Across the statute, we have not only do we need to look at statute, but often it gets really detailed with these federal regulations. And oftentimes feds will have a new list of priorities and then they pass those or share those concerns with us. So that might require some changes to local policy, or we might add additional language to the request for proposal per the feds reinterpretation of some of these final rules, because they really get into the detail of direct and equitable access and all sorts of programming and rulemaking. Our state plan, right? This is required. It's a significant document in scope where it covers labor market information. Does it inform our activities? Maybe at the highest levels. You should have a general awareness. Admittedly, I think in recent years, we don't always stress this, but this document really should articulate the scope and the plan protocol for collaborating, communicating, and coordinating within the one-stop system. It's the blueprint or the map. And in my time, what I've learned is better to articulate what we're doing versus what we want to do, because if it's aspirational and it doesn't come to fruition over the course of 2 years, it's a 4-year plan, and it's edited right midterm. So at year 2, there's then that discrepancy between what you said you were going to do versus what you're actually doing. So if any of you get into some of that narrative, you might see mention of one or more of your programs. And then finally, the uniform administrative requirements. Those are the documents on our side of things under Ed. It's often called EDGAR, right? The Education Department General Administrative Regulations here. But that's really just a subpart of the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget Uniform Grant Guidance. And so that dictates a lot of daily operations, compliance, which intersects with data under Section 116 of WIO. So with that, I know it's a lot of moving parts, but I'm happy to entertain any questions or insights or comments.
One of the things I try and provide the employees at Cornerstones with is some data talking points. Not because I expect everyone to go out and do the dog and pony show about our amazing program, but every single person on here has a voice and a passion for adult education, and they should always have a couple stats in their back pocket to rattle off to people when people express an interest or say something maybe not as well educated as they should be about the kinds of clients that we work with every day. And if it's more than just a director or 3 or 4 people advocating for adult ed, but if every single person, there's 20 of you today, if every single person's advocating, that's 20 people advocating, not just Laura at LSS or Kim at Cornerstones. And so, and sometimes we don't think of data points that teachers are being exposed to, like, what we really need to know. And so ask, because we do have access to a lot of data.
Yeah, and I've found it's great to bounce ideas with colleagues because we've got such a rich data team and such an experienced administrative leadership team across the providers who've been doing this, who have fresh insight and perspective and might be new and have really insightful, provocative questions or perspectives. And we've got those who've been at this 25, 30 years who have, a significant body of expertise. But, to me, you need to think about that audience. And do you want to highlight adult education as a means to redistribute opportunity? Or do you want to articulate adult education as a means of workforce readiness and a pathway to the middle class and an off ramp to public, so we can be mindful of that. And I think together, and it would be nice if we had a legislative champion in South Dakota legislature who was intimately familiar with our program, who could speak to some of these issues, right? Oh my gosh, you've got 41,000 South Dakotans, and how many GEDs were awarded last year in Title II, right? 200. But again, do they understand those elaborate barriers to employment? And by elaborate, I mean you know the definitions, but I mean these significant barriers to employment that students and the need to upskill and essentially remediate how many years to help students learn phonics, word recognition, all of that. So yeah, how can we best tell this story? Other thoughts, comments?
I thought I'd just say thank you, John, for, I know this is not the like closing officially, but I do appreciate you sharing this. Every time you share, I learn several new things, and really appreciate your mastery of these different resources. It's really helpful. And as a context, local context, I know Kim shared about the struggle with the lower levels of ESL. And I think that's a testament to the value of our statewide team and cadre, because the two lowest levels of ESL, we consistently exceed our benchmarks on as a local program. Which I know I've mentioned before, and the higher levels, we don't have, we tend not to meet our goals at the highest levels. Here in Sioux Falls, it's likely similar to other communities where those that are employed are working so many hours that they sleep 2 to 4 hours a night. I don't know if we have enough data to drill down on how many jobs are you working and how does that impact your measurable skill gains. But I've noticed when I walk into a room that our advanced level students are sleeping 2 to 4 hours and working 1 to 2 jobs, sometimes 2 full-time jobs.
But Laura, and that is so important for stakeholders to realize, and even our partners within the One Stop. And I'm not sure, you know more about that. You have that frontline interaction. But to that point, Laura, I would say LSS could take a point of pride in that, your median earnings, right, from 23, 24. It was well over $11,000, right, year learners. Now, granted, those data are not timely, right? They're a year and a half old, but that is one datum or field that highlights that, right? Your learners lead the state in median earnings by far. And there are other providers who have excellent, don't get me wrong, but so yeah, how we qualify these quantitative data are important as well. But other thoughts? I see we're at the top of the hour. Again, if you have questions and feel more comfortable emailing me or messaging me over Teams or calling me, I'd be happy to help in any way I can, or provide other data-related resources. If you're writing a grant, not the RFP, I can't assist you with your direct RFP, but I can, in a direct and equitable manner, share various resources during that time. But always, as a subrecipient, I'm here to assist you with these data collection, entry, reporting, and securing and analyses. So I wish you all a lovely holiday weekend. Travel safely and enjoy some beautiful spring weather. Thank you very much.